I am going to tell you about 48 hours that split my life into two completely different lives, the one before and the one after. On the afternoon of June 17, 2003, I pulled a drowning infant Bigfoot out of the Selway River in central Idaho. I did this without thinking. The way you do anything in a genuine emergency, the body moves before the mind has weighed the options, and only afterward does the full weight of what just happened arrive. The next morning, its father came to find me. My name is Addie Larkin. I am 51 years old. I was, at the time of these events, a seasonal hydrologist with the U.S. Forest Service, stationed out of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness Field Office for my fourth consecutive summer. I took water samples. I measured stream flow. I monitored snowmelt timing and erosion patterns in one of the largest designated wilderness areas in the continental United States, 1.3 million acres of Idaho backcountry, where the phrase "no motorized vehicles" is taken seriously enough that everything you need for a week in the field has to go in on your back. I am a scientist. I need you to hold on to that fact as I tell you what happened, because I needed to hold on to it myself every day for the 21 years since, as a way of insisting on accuracy over comfort. Scientists report what they observe. What I observed on June 17th and June 18th of 2003 is what I am going to tell you, with the same precision I would bring to a discharge rate measurement or a sediment load calculation. Here's why this changed everything for me at the outset. I did not go into those 2 days looking for anything except stream flow data. I came out of them with a completely rebuilt understanding of what is alive in the wilderness I had been studying for 4 years, what family means outside the human species, and what it costs, and what it gives. When you intervene in a situation that was none of your business and everything that mattered, there are moments when standing still is not an option. I am grateful I didn't stand still. I am also aware that gratitude and terror can occupy the same space simultaneously. The Selway River runs approximately 100 miles through the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness before joining the Loxa River near Lowell, Idaho. In June, it is not the river it becomes by August. In June, it is running snowmelt, cold, fast, carrying the winter's accumulated weight in a surge that experienced whitewater kayakers rate as Class 4 to Class 5, depending on the section and the year. The section I was working on June 17, 2003, was approximately 40 miles upriver from the nearest road, accessible only via a 3-day pack-in. I had been in the field for 6 days, working a series of monitoring stations along the river corridor, with 2 days remaining before my scheduled extraction. My camp was on a gravel bar on the east bank, set back from the high water line in a spot I had used twice before. The Selway at that location runs through a constriction. 2 canyon walls narrow in the river to perhaps 40 feet of channel, the current compressed and fast, the banks on both sides dropping directly into deep water with no eddy structure to catch anything that went in. It is the kind of water that requires full attention when you are working near it, and I had developed the habit of moving slowly and deliberately within 15 feet of the bank during high flow periods. The morning of June 17th was overcast, approximately 58 degrees, with a wind from the southwest that was moving the tops of the conifers on the canyon rim and bringing, intermittently, the smell of rain from higher in the drainage. I had completed my morning measurements by 9 and was processing my field notes at the camp table when I heard something upstream. I want to be precise about what I heard. It was not an animal distress call in any form I recognized. It was a sound with a quality I have struggled to describe in my journal entries from that period. Rhythmic, high-pitched relative to what I later learned was its source, with a desperate irregularity that suggested exhaustion rather than sustained alarm, like something calling and losing the strength to call and calling again. I picked up my gear instinctively, the habit of a field scientist, always have what you need, and walked upstream. I found it approximately 120 meters upstream of my camp, in a section where the canyon wall created a small backwater eddy on the east bank, the only slow water in that stretch of river. It had been swept into the eddy and was clinging to a submerged root mass that extended from a large cedar at the bank's edge, its head barely above the surface, its grip failing. It was small. That is the first and most important thing. Small. In a creature of its species, small means perhaps the size of a large human 4-year-old. 25 to 35 pounds, I estimated, with the proportional differences I now know to expect: longer limbs, broader jaw, hands that were oversized relative to the body. The hair was light brown, almost tawny, plastered flat by the water. The eyes, which found mine the moment I came to the bank, were the most striking feature, dark, round, and holding an expression that bypassed every species boundary I had. The pure, undisguised terror of a small thing that knows it is dying and has just seen the possibility that it might not. I did not hesitate. I have thought about this many times since, and I cannot find the hesitation. I dropped my pack. I took the throw rope I carried as standard safety equipment for river work, a 60-foot bag with a weighted end. I positioned myself on the root mass above the eddy, braced my feet, and threw the weighted end into the water upstream of the infant, letting it drift into the backwater until the infant could reach it. It grabbed the rope. What most people don't understand about that moment is that what happened next required the infant to do something that was not purely instinctive. It had to shift its grip from the root mass to the rope and hold on through the pull. A purely instinct-driven animal in that level of distress will grip whatever it has and not release it. The infant looked at the rope. It looked at me. It transferred its grip deliberately with the specific intention of a being that had processed the situation and made a decision. I pulled it out in approximately 90 seconds. I laid it on the gravel above the waterline, and I knelt next to it, and I looked at what I had. It was breathing. That was the first assessment and the most important one. Breathing fast, coughing, expelling river water, the chest heaving with the specific urgency of a body reclaiming its function. I rolled it slightly onto its side, the standard recovery position for aspiration risk, and supported the head, which was heavy relative to the neck in the way of young primates, and I talked. I don't know why I talked. I talked because silence felt wrong, and because talking in a calm, low voice is what you do with a frightened animal in distress, and because whatever this was, it was clearly frightened and clearly in distress. I said, "You're okay. You're out of the water. You're going to be okay." It looked at me throughout, not with the flat, present moment intensity of an animal, with something more complex, the eyes tracking my face, my hands, my mouth while I spoke, processing the information of me with a comprehensiveness that I found, even in the middle of an emergency, remarkable. It was assessing me while I was assessing it. By my field notebook's timestamp, it was 9:47 a.m. I know because I opened the notebook reflexively, the scientist's habit of documentation firing regardless of circumstances, and wrote a single line: infant, non-human primate, possible hominidae, river rescue, alive, gravel bar east bank, station 7 upstream. Then I put the notebook down and stayed with the infant while it recovered. My experience revealed something profound in those first 30 minutes on the bank. The recovery from acute distress in this infant moved through stages I recognized from primate rehabilitation accounts. The initial survival-focused stage of pure physiological recovery, followed by a period of environmental orientation, followed by something that I can only call social orientation, in which the infant turned its attention fully to me and began the process of deciding what I was. By 10:30, it was sitting upright. By 11, it had moved on its own initiative approximately 1 foot closer to me. It was deciding whether I was safe. From approximately 10 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, the infant and I occupied a gravel bar on the east bank of the Selway River and conducted, in the absence of any shared language, a negotiation. I did not attempt to confine it. I did not attempt to physically manage it. Beyond the initial recovery positioning, I sat at a distance I judged as non-threatening, approximately 6 feet, and I kept my movement slow and my voice low, and I tried to communicate through every non-verbal channel available to me that I was not a threat. My observations consistently showed that the infant's behavioral repertoire was more sophisticated than any non-human primate behavior I had studied or observed in the field. It was not operating on fear response alone. It was processing the situation through what I can only describe as a social intelligence framework, reading my body language, my proximity choices, my vocal tone, my eye behavior, and integrating all of it into a continuous, updating assessment. At 11:45, it made a sound, a single, brief vocalization, low, with a quality I would describe as tentative. Not a distress call, not an alarm, something quieter and more considered. The sound you make when you are testing whether the other party in a communication can hear you. I made a sound back. I kept it in the same register, low, brief, non-threatening. I had no idea whether I was producing anything meaningful. I was matching the quality and approximate pitch of what I had heard and hoping that the intent, "I am listening, I am not hostile," was the part that carried. The infant looked at me for a long time after I made that sound. Then it moved 3 feet closer. Here's why this changed everything for me in those 3 hours. I had spent 4 years as a field scientist measuring the physical properties of wilderness: water temperature, sediment load, discharge rates. Quantifiable things, things that could be expressed in numbers and submitted in reports. What I was doing on that gravel bar had no measurement framework, no protocol, no peer-reviewed methodology. I was trying to communicate with something that had no obligation to communicate back, using only the most fundamental and universal signals available: proximity, voice, stillness, the expression of goodwill through sustained, non-threatening presence. And it was working. The infant fell asleep approximately 2 feet from me at 12:30. I did not move for the entire 40 minutes it slept. At approximately 1:15 in the afternoon, the infant woke. The waking was immediate and complete, not the gradual surfacing of human sleep, but the full alert waking of a prey animal, all systems online simultaneously. It sat upright. It looked at me, it looked at the river, it looked at the forest on the canyon rim above us. It was orienting, taking in the full geography of its situation with a rapid, comprehensive scan. Then it looked upstream. I want to describe that look carefully because it was the first of several moments in those 48 hours where I observed something that I have never seen in any non-human animal. A deliberate, directed, sustained look at a specific distant point with an expression that I can only call expectation. Not the alertness of an animal sensing a predator, something more patient than that. The look of someone who knows that something is coming and is waiting for it to arrive. It knew where its family was. It knew, in whatever way these beings know such things, that someone was looking for it. The infant looked at me one final time before it left. This is the detail I have returned to most often in 21 years, and I am going to try to describe it accurately. It turned from its upstream orientation and looked at me directly on a full eye contact, sustained for approximately 5 seconds, with an expression I can only describe as deliberate acknowledgement, not gratitude in the human performance sense, not the exuberance of a social primate signaling affiliation, something quieter and more considered, a recognition offered and received that what had happened between us had happened and that it mattered. Then it walked into the river at the shallow upstream end of the eddy, crossed to the west bank with a sure-footedness that told me it knew this river, and disappeared into the timber on the other side. I sat on the gravel bar for a long time after it was gone. What most people don't understand about that departure is that it was not an ending. It was, though I did not know it yet, the beginning of the next chapter. The chapter that began the following morning, when I woke at 5:30 to a sound that had no place in the catalog of any animal I had encountered in 4 years of Selway field work. June 18th, 2003, 5:30 in the morning. I want to describe the quality of the sound before I describe the sound itself, because the quality is important. The Selway Canyon in the early morning has its own acoustic signature. The river, continuous and vast, the birds beginning in the canopy above, the specific reverberation of a narrow canyon amplifying and reflecting sound in ways that make distance estimation unreliable. I had been sleeping in that acoustic environment for 6 nights and had calibrated to it well enough that anomalies registered clearly. What woke me was not loud. That is important. It was not a crash in the brush or a crack of branch or anything the alarm literature of wilderness preparedness would have taught me to react to. It was a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, transmitted through the ground as much as through the air, felt in the sleeping pad beneath me before I heard it with my ears. A resonance, deep, sustained, with a quality I have since described in my field notes as architectural. Not an animal making a sound, but a space being filled with sound from the inside. I was out of my sleeping bag before I was fully awake. Here's why this changed everything for me in the first 10 seconds of June 18th. I have been frightened in the backcountry before. I have been frightened by bears at close range, by flash floods, by lightning in exposed terrain. That fear is visceral and immediate and has a clear object. What I felt at 5:30 on June 18th was different, a fear that was slower and larger and did not have a clear object yet, which made it, paradoxically, more frightening. The body knows when something is outside its category of experience. My body knew. I dressed in the sleeping bag. I put on my boots inside the tent. These are the specific telling details of someone managing a fear response. The small, controllable actions that give the mind something to do while it processes the larger situation. Then I unzipped the tent door. He was on the west bank, directly across the river from my camp, standing at the water's edge in the early gray light, looking at me. I am going to give you the dimensions because they matter to the story. 9 feet tall by my estimate against the timber behind him. Weight impossible to determine accurately, but the impression was not of an animal standing upright. It was of a structure, something that had the scale of things that don't move easily, like a mature tree or a rock face. The shoulders were broad enough that the word shoulders feels inadequate. The chest was deep. The arms hung at a length that was not human. The hands, visible even at 40 feet as remarkable objects, large, dark, capable of things I didn't want to think about specifically. The face was turned toward me. The eyes, even across the width of the cellway in early morning light, were visible, dark, deep-set, and entirely without the blankness of animal eyes. They were occupied. Something was happening behind them, some process of evaluation and decision that was proceeding at whatever pace it proceeded at, and the outcome of which I had absolutely no ability to predict. I did not move. I was not capable of moving. My experience revealed something profound in the first 30 seconds of looking at the father across the cellway. The scale of its presence had a quality that I have since tried to describe to people and have always failed to convey accurately. It was not simply that it was large, though it was extraordinarily large. It was that its presence had weight, not physical weight, though the ground would certainly have registered that too, but the weight of a being whose intelligence and whose history and whose experience of the world it inhabited were commensurate with its physical scale. It was not a large animal. It was a large person. And the distinction between those two things in that moment was everything. I was standing in front of something that understood the situation completely. He stood on the west bank for approximately 10 minutes without moving. I stood at my tent door without moving. The cellway ran between us with its usual indifference to the situation on either bank. What most people don't understand about those 10 minutes is that they were not a standoff. A standoff implies two parties with competing objectives, each waiting for the other to act. That was not what was happening. What was happening was an assessment, a thorough, systematic, unhurried assessment of me and my camp and my situation by a being that had arrived at this location with a specific purpose and was taking the time to complete the assessment before acting on it. I understood this somehow, without being told. The same quality of attention that I had observed in the infant on the gravel bar was present in the father across the river, amplified by scale and years and the specific intensity of a parent who has spent the night looking for its child. He was reading me, everything about me, my body language, my camp, my gear, the evidence of 6 days of solo field work on this bank. He was constructing a picture of who I was and what I had done. On the 7th minute, he made a sound, not the resonance that had woken me. Something different, shorter, with a directional quality, aimed not at me, but at the forest behind him. To the north, the infant came out of the trees. I sat down, not as a strategy or a gesture. My legs simply stopped working for a moment, and I sat down on the ground next to my tent, and I watched the infant walk to its father and stand next to him, close, pressed against the leg with the specific, unself-conscious seeking of contact that young primates show with their parents, the need for the reassurance of proximity after a long absence. The father looked at the infant. Then he looked at me, and in the sequence of those two looks, at the child, at the person who had been with the child, I saw something that I have no difficulty naming, because I have seen it in every mammalian parent I have ever worked with in 22 years of field biology. He was confirming that the infant was whole, and he was confirming that I was the reason. I did not expect him to cross. The cellway in that section, at that time of year, runs approximately waist deep on a human being in the shallowest ford. The same crossing the infant had used to return to the West Bank the previous afternoon. On something the height and mass of the father, the water would have reached mid-thigh at most. The current was fast, but fast water that moves a human being does not necessarily move 9 feet and several hundred pounds of anything. He entered the river. I want to describe what it looked like to watch something that large cross a river like the Selway in high water. It was not dramatic, and the absence of drama was itself the most remarkable thing about it. He moved through the current the way a bridge abutment moves through current, present in it, affected by it slightly, fundamentally not subject to it. Each step deliberate and complete before the next one began. The water that rose to mid-thigh on him and that would have knocked me off my feet was to him a feature of the terrain rather than a threat to be managed. He reached my bank in approximately 45 seconds. The infant had not followed. It remained on the west bank, watching with an attention that I found in retrospect significant. It was not distressed by the crossing, not alarmed by the father's approach to me. It was watching with the specific, interested calm of a being that knows what the situation is and is not worried about the outcome. The infant knew something about what was going to happen that I did not. The father stopped 12 feet from where I was sitting on the ground. 12 feet, close enough that the scale of him was no longer a visual abstraction, but a physical reality that I could feel in a way I cannot fully explain. A presence that occupied space differently from the way the trees occupied space, the way large concentrations of mass have a gravity that isn't metaphorical. He looked at me for a very long time. I am going to tell you what I felt in the 2 minutes we looked at each other at 12 feet, because I think the feeling is the most important data I have from those 48 hours. I was frightened. I want to be clear and honest about that. I was frightened in a way that was physical. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, the specific muscular preparation of a body that has assessed a nearby threat and is preloading for a response it knows it cannot effectively make. There is no scenario in which a 140-pound woman sitting on the ground successfully responds to a physical threat from something 9 feet tall and several hundred pounds. My body knew this and was preparing anyway, because that is what bodies do. Underneath the fear and alongside it, not replacing it but occupying the same space, was something else. My experience revealed something profound in those 2 minutes. The father was not threatening me, not in the behavioral sense that I could observe. He was standing at 12 feet and he was looking at me with the same complete, systematic attention I had felt from the infant on the gravel bar, but with more complexity, more layers of assessment, being run simultaneously, more history behind the eyes doing the assessing. He was looking at the person who had been with his child during the night. My observations consistently showed me something in the expression that I have spent 21 years trying to render accurately. It was not simple. It was not a single emotion or a single process. It was the look of a parent who has been through the specific acute terror of a missing child and who is now in the presence of the person who intervened, running the full accounting simultaneously. The relief, the residual fear, the gratitude that has not yet resolved into a comfortable form because the situation is too new and too strange for resolution. It was the most human expression I have ever seen on a non-human face. And then he did something I did not anticipate. He sat down, not the slow settling of a large animal resting, a deliberate, considered sitting, the specific choice of a being that has decided the situation calls for a different posture than standing. He folded himself down onto the gravel bar with a care for his own weight that reminded me of people I have known who are very large and very aware of how their size registers in the spaces they occupy. Sitting, he was still eye level with me or slightly above, but the geometry had changed completely. Standing, he was a presence I had to look up at and contend with. Sitting across 12 feet of gravel, he was something I could simply be with. Here's why this changed everything for me. That choice, the decision to sit, to reduce the size differential, to configure the encounter as something other than a confrontation, was the action of a being that understood how it was being perceived and chose to address that perception. It was not instinct. An animal acting on instinct in a high-stakes encounter with an unfamiliar species does not modulate its physical presentation to make the other party more comfortable. That modulation requires the ability to model another being's interior state and respond to it. He had modeled my fear. He had responded to it by making himself smaller. I have cried telling this part of the story more than once. I am not embarrassed about that. We sat across from each other for approximately 20 minutes. In that time, no sound was made by either of us except the sound of the river. I did not speak. Everything in the quality of the silence told me that speech was not the right register for what was happening. I sat still and I looked at him and I let myself be looked at, and I tried to be as simply and completely as I could manage what I actually was. A person who had been near his child when his child needed help, who had no hostility toward him or his family, who was, if she was honest, more grateful for the 48 hours she had just lived through than frightened of them, even in the middle of being frightened. My observations consistently showed me something in those 20 minutes that I want to be very precise about. He was not deciding whether to harm me. That question, I believe, had been resolved before he crossed the river. He had already done his assessment from the West Bank. The sitting was not threat evaluation. The sitting was something else, something I have come to think of in the years since as the specific silence of two beings from different worlds, acknowledging that something unusual had passed between their families and that the acknowledgement itself required time. He stood after approximately 20 minutes. Again, the deliberateness, a controlled rise, not the sudden movement of alarm or aggression, but the intentional return to an upright posture of a being that has completed what it came to do. He looked at me for a final moment. I want to describe that look without overstating it, because I think overstatement would be a disservice to its actual quality. It was not dramatic. It did not contain the thunderclap of revelation that I might have written into it if I were constructing this story rather than reporting it. It was quiet, and it was brief, and it was complete. It was, I believe, the look of a parent who has confirmed that his child is alive and that the person responsible is not a threat, and who is now going home. He turned and walked to the water. He crossed the cellway with the same unhurried deliberateness with which he had arrived, present in the current, not troubled by it, each step complete. He reached the west bank. The infant was there. Without any visible ceremony, they turned together and moved into the timber. The forest closed behind them in the way that only genuinely wild country closes behind something that belongs in it. I sat on the gravel bar for a long time. The river kept running. The birds in the canyon resumed whatever they had been doing. The world reassembled itself around the absence of what had just been in it. The way water fills the space where something has been submerged. I opened my field notebook at 9:40 a.m. and I wrote for 2 hours. I have had 21 years to process 48 hours, and I want to tell you what I've arrived at. Not as conclusions, because I am a scientist, and I am wary of conclusions drawn from an N of 1, but as what the data suggests. The first thing the data suggests is about instinct and intelligence. When I pulled that infant out of the river, I acted on instinct. I did not deliberate. I did not weigh options. My body moved, and the rope was in the water before my conscious mind had finished constructing a sentence about the situation. Afterward, I wondered about this: whether the instantaneous nature of the response meant that it was merely reflexive, animal, the mammalian rescue instinct that operates across species lines. I don't think so. I think what happened in that moment was that the infant's expression, the eyes that found mine and held the pure, direct, undisguised need of something that knows it is dying, communicated something that bypassed the deliberative layer entirely and spoke directly to a part of me that does not distinguish between species when confronted with that specific need. What most people don't understand is that this is not sentimentality. It is, I believe, the most fundamental thing I know about what I am, that the recognition of need in another being and the response to it is not a higher cognitive function. It is a base function. It operates before reasoning, not after it. And the fact that it operates across species lines, that I could not look at that infant and decide not to help it any more than I could decide not to catch a falling child, tells me something important about what the divide between human and non-human actually is, and where it actually runs. It does not run where I thought it ran. The second thing the data suggests is about what fathers are. The being who crossed the cellway on the morning of June 18th could have resolved the situation in any number of ways. He had the physical capacity to resolve it in ways that would not have required me to still be here to tell this story. He chose not to. He chose to cross the river and sit on a gravel bar and look at a frightened woman for 20 minutes and then go home. My experience revealed something profound in that choice. Fatherhood, the specific, acute, species transcending experience of having a child at risk and then recovering them, had produced in him the same complex emotional accounting that I have observed it produce in every human father I have known in that situation. The relief inseparable from the residual terror. The need to see and confirm with one's own eyes that the child is whole. The turn toward the person who was there, the need to look at them and understand what happened. He came to look me in the eye because that is what parents do. That is what parents of any species do. The Selway does not know the difference. The water runs the same for all of us. The third thing the data suggests is about the cost of intervention. I have been a field scientist for long enough to understand that interventions in natural systems have consequences that cascade in ways you cannot fully anticipate from the point of intervention. I know this about water systems. You change one variable upstream and the downstream effects multiply in non-linear ways for years. I know it about wildlife. A well-intentioned intervention in a wild animal situation creates dependencies and outcomes that the intervening party rarely fully accounts for. I pulled an infant from a river. I spent 3 hours on a gravel bar building a fragile, unprecedented, cross-species communication with it. I watched it leave. I spent a night in a camp where I was visible and known and findable by something I had no capacity to predict. I sat 12 feet from something 9 feet tall and accepted its assessment without knowing the outcome. Here's why this changed everything for me. As a final reckoning, every one of those steps was a consequence of the first one. And the first one was not a choice, it was a reflex. I have thought about whether I would have chosen differently if I had been given time to deliberate. And I cannot answer that honestly, because I cannot actually access the version of myself that deliberated. I only have the version that moved. What I can say is this: the consequences were not bad. They were terrifying and extraordinary and life-changing, and they were not bad. The infant survived. The father came and confirmed it and left. The relationship between his family and the particular human being who occupied a gravel bar on the east bank of the Selway for 6 days in June 2003 was resolved through whatever process that family uses to resolve such things in a way that allowed everyone involved to go home. That is not a guaranteed outcome of intervention in a wild system. I am aware of that. I am aware that the specific sequence of events that led to the father sitting down rather than standing was not fully under my control and was not entirely to my credit. I was helped by the infant's prior experience of me as safe. I was helped by the father's intelligence, which was considerable. I was helped by whatever social and ethical framework these beings operate within, which is evidently one that distinguishes between threat and beneficence and responds to each accordingly. I was helped, in other words, by the fact that they are not what the stories say they are. I am 51 years old. I left Forest Service field work in 2010 and now teach hydrology at the University of Idaho. I spend less time in the backcountry than I used to, and the time I do spend there has a quality it didn't have before June 2003, a quality of attention, of openness to what's actually present, rather than what the official maps and surveys say should be present. I have not returned to the specific section of the Selway where the rescue occurred, not as a deliberate avoidance, more as a form of respect for a boundary I believe exists there between my world and another world that I crossed once in extraordinary circumstances and that I do not have the right to cross as a matter of course. The field notebook from June 2003 is in my office. I have read the entries from the 17th and 18th hundreds of times. The handwriting on the 18th is not steady. The data is accurate. What most people don't understand about carrying an experience like this for 21 years is that it doesn't settle. It doesn't become less vivid or less present or less immediate. The gravel bar is as real to me today as it was in June 2003. The eyes of the infant in the water are as real to me today as they were in the first second I saw them. The father sitting 12 feet away in the early morning light is as real to me today as anything that has ever happened to me. This is not trauma. I want to be clear about that. It is the opposite of trauma. It is the kind of experience that does not recede because it does not need to recede. It is not something the mind is trying to process away. It is something the mind is trying to keep because it is, of all the things I have experienced in 51 years, the most alive. My experience revealed something profound in 21 years of living with this story. That the most important thing it gave me was not the specific knowledge of what I had encountered, though that is extraordinary. The most important thing it gave me was a recalibration of the question, what is alive in this world? I had been trained to answer that question with taxonomy, species lists, population surveys, range maps, the official inventory of life that science has compiled and continues to compile. That inventory is real and it matters, and I have spent my career contributing to it. But the inventory has edges. It has limits. It has, in the wilderness areas I have worked in for 25 years, gaps that are not random and not small. This creature holds a secret that we have not been willing to seriously investigate. That the wilderness is occupied by intelligence that is not in our surveys, living in family structures we have not documented, managing its relationship to the expanding human world with a sophistication we have not credited it with, and occasionally, rarely, in the most unusual circumstances, choosing to make contact with us across the species line that we have always assumed was fixed and total. It is not fixed. It is not total. It is a line that runs through specific moments on specific mornings when something looks at you with the need of an infant or the measured assessment of a parent, and you find yourself on the other side of everything you thought you knew. I have been on the other side for 21 years. I do not regret a single step of the crossing.